My name is Nora Bennett. I'm 33, and I've spent most of my adult life acting like I didn't need anything from my father, because it was easier than admitting how badly I wanted to belong. 2 weeks after he died, I sat in a mahogany-panelled law office with cold air blowing on my damp palms, watching my stepmother glide in like she owned the building. She didn't sit first. She looked straight at me and said, calm as a weather report, "Nora, your dad took you out of the inheritance." She said it like she was doing me a favour by making it quick. Then our attorney didn't reach for the will. He asked one quiet question instead. "Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from. If you've ever stayed quiet to keep the family calm, stay with me. You're not alone in moments like this." I didn't always feel like an outsider in my father's life. When I was a kid, the house felt solid, predictable, the kind of place where the garage smelled like motor oil and cardboard, and the kitchen always had a stack of envelopes waiting to be opened. My dad, Graham, believed in paper. He taught me how to line up receipts on the counter, how to staple invoices in the right corner, and how to read the fine print before signing anything. He used to say paper didn't lie, people did. Back then, I thought he was just talking about business. My mother died when I was young. After that, it was just the two of us for a while. Not perfect, not sentimental, but steady. I learned early how to be low maintenance, how to do my homework at the kitchen table while he worked through payroll, how to reheat leftovers without asking. I didn't need much attention. I told myself that was a strength. When Candace entered our lives, she brought noise with her. Soft noise at first, perfume in rooms that used to smell like coffee, throw pillows that didn't belong anywhere, a new way of speaking that sounded warm but landed sharp. She talked about family energy and fresh starts. She rearranged furniture and replaced framed photos without asking. The house didn't feel unsafe, just unfamiliar, like someone had moved my things an inch to the left while I wasn't looking. At the beginning, I tried. I showed up. I smiled. I learned her rules. Her kids, Tyler and Sienna, were younger then, loud, entitled in a way that wasn't obvious yet. Tyler liked to interrupt. Sienna liked attention. Candace liked control. None of that felt dangerous, just exhausting. The first Thanksgiving after Candace married my dad was the moment I still replay. She took the head of the table without saying a word. She handed out seating assignments. When I reached for the chair next to my dad, she touched my arm lightly and said, "Why don't you sit over there with the kids? It'll be easier." Everyone heard it. No one argued. My dad didn't look up from his plate. I carried my food to the other end of the table and told myself it didn't matter. It always matters. By then, I was already working at Bennett Freight. Not because anyone handed me a job, because I asked for one. Operations, the unglamorous stuff, late shipments, vendor calls, broken scanners at the warehouse. I paid my student loans. I rented a small apartment. Candace liked to remind people I lived independently, as if that meant I wasn't really part of the family anymore. Every holiday followed the same pattern. Tyler got praised for potential. Sienna got praised for personality. I got praised for being so responsible. Responsibility, I learned, was the word adults used when they didn't intend to give you anything back. 3 years ago, on Christmas Eve, I found my dad standing alone in the hallway, staring at the wall of family photos. The old ones were gone, replaced by newer frames. Candace and the kids. Candace and my dad. Candace everywhere. I asked him if he was okay. He nodded, then shook his head. He said, "There's something I need you to hold on to one day, just not yet." I waited for more. It didn't come. I went home that night thinking it was another promise that would never be cashed. The summer before he died, I started noticing small things at work. Consulting invoices with no matching projects. Payments approved without context. When I asked Candace about it, she smiled and said, "Your job is to do, not to question." My dad didn't contradict her. He just looked tired, smaller. I told myself stress did that to people. In the last few months, Candace managed everything around him, his schedule, his medications, who got updates. When I visited, she spoke for him. When he forgot a word, she laughed it off. "See? He's slipping. I believed her because believing her was easier than imagining the alternative. 3 weeks before he died, I left the house with a knot in my stomach and a guilt I couldn't explain. I thought I'd failed him by not pushing harder. I didn't know then that silence was part of a performance I wasn't meant to understand yet. After my dad died, the house felt wrong in a way I couldn't name. Not sad, controlled. Candice moved through rooms like a manager closing a location. She boxed things without asking. She changed passwords. She told people I was handling things so they wouldn't call me. I found out later she told others I was too emotional to be involved. That word again. Responsible when it helped her, emotional when it didn't. A few days after the funeral, I went back to my apartment and found a stack of mail I didn't recognize, forwarded by mistake, legal envelopes, bank notices. I didn't open them. I just stared at my name spelled correctly on the front, then set them aside. Part of me didn't want to know. Knowing meant choosing a side. I'd spent years surviving by not choosing. At work, things shifted. Candice started showing up more. She brought Tyler into meetings he had no reason to attend. He sat back with his arms crossed, smirking when numbers didn't make sense to him. Sienna filmed everything for her stories, even when Candice told her not to. "People love transparency," she said. No one corrected her. I learned to keep my mouth shut and my notes precise. One afternoon, Mrs. Callahan caught me in the driveway. She looked uncomfortable, like she was crossing a line she didn't want to cross. She said she'd seen a man in a suit come by late one night. A notary, she thought. My dad had been angry, loud and angry, which wasn't like him. Candice had closed the door behind them. I thanked Mrs. Callahan and went inside, my heart beating too fast for no reason I could explain. I told myself it was none of my business, that people handled their marriages in private, that grief made everyone behave strangely, that I was reaching. I was good at explaining things away. I'd been practicing for years. Then I got the call about the will reading. Candice texted me the time and address like she was assigning a meeting. No condolences, no questions, just logistics. Harper and West LLP, downtown, 3 o'clock. I showed up early and sat in the waiting room with my hands folded in my lap, listening to the hum of the air conditioning. I told myself I was prepared for anything. When Candice arrived late, she didn't apologize. She talked about a car dealership and college reliability like none of this mattered. Tyler smiled at me the way people smile when they think they've already won. Sienna complained about her schedule. I felt 12 years old again, standing at the wrong end of a table. I didn't expect fairness. I didn't expect kindness. I expected it to be minimized. I expected to hear that I'd done fine on my own and didn't need anything else. What I didn't expect was how calm Candice sounded when she said I'd been removed. No anger, no guilt, just certainty. That was the moment something shifted. Not because of what she said, but because of what she assumed. She assumed the story was over. She assumed I would nod and swallow it like I always had. She assumed silence meant agreement. She didn't notice the attorney hadn't opened the will. She didn't notice the way he watched her speak, like he was checking off a list. And she didn't notice the question he asked instead, the one about who'd been paying the insurance on the house. I did, because for the first time since my dad died, I realized there was a version of this story I didn't know yet. And whatever it wasn't written by Candice. Candice leaned back in her chair like she was settling in for a presentation she'd rehearsed. She crossed her legs, smoothed her jacket, looked around the room once as if checking that we were all paying attention. Then she started talking before the attorney could say a word. She said my dad had been disappointed in me. Not angry, disappointed. She said it the way people say a diagnosis, permanent, unfixable. She talked about my lifestyle choices, my lack of commitment to the family, and my tendency to do my own thing. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She spoke with the confidence of someone who believed the paperwork was already on her side. Tyler nodded along. He didn't even try to hide it. He looked at me once and smiled, quick and sharp, like we were sharing a joke I wasn't in on. Sienna didn't look up from her phone. Her fingers kept moving, tapping out something for an audience that wasn't in the room. I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed, because I'd learned that interrupting Candace only gave her more room to perform. She liked resistance. Silence made her uncomfortable. The attorney, Miles Harper, waited until she finished. He didn't rush her. He let the last word hang in the air until even Candace seemed to notice the quiet. Then he asked us all to confirm our identities. He asked us to sign a document acknowledging our presence. Formal, boring, necessary. Candace sighed like it was an inconvenience. When she finally paused, Miles adjusted his glasses and said, almost casually, "Your husband predicted you'd use the phrase family loyalty." He smiled faintly, like he'd remembered an inside joke. Candace stiffened, just for a second, enough for me to see it. He still didn't open the will. Instead, he nodded toward the woman sitting beside him. Dana Cho introduced herself as a forensic accountant. Her voice was flat, professional. She placed a thin folder on the table and slid it forward. Candace glanced at it and smiled politely, like she was humoring a detour. Dana didn't look at Candace when she spoke. She looked at the numbers. She talked about patterns, about household accounts and credit cards opened in the last 18 months, about transfers that didn't match any known expenses, about consulting invoices without corresponding projects. She spoke the way doctors do when they already know the diagnosis and are just explaining it to the family. Candace laughed once, a small, dismissive sound. She said everything she'd done was for the family, that my dad had trusted her, that she managed things because someone had to. She said I wouldn't understand because I'd never run a household like she had. Miles listened. Then he asked her a simple question. "Why did you call Hazel Pine's memory care 3 weeks before Graham died?" The room changed. Candace's smile didn't disappear, but it froze. She said she was just asking questions, planning ahead, being responsible. That word again. Tyler shifted in his chair. Sienna finally looked up, confused. Miles nodded, as if that made sense. Then he asked if Candace remembered discussing how to have someone declared incompetent for their own safety. Candace's eyes flicked toward me for the first time, not with contempt, with calculation. I felt my hands go cold. Miles still hadn't opened the will. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. He didn't turn it on yet. He just placed it on the table between us. A pause, long enough to be uncomfortable. "I think," he said evenly, "we should talk about what Graham was doing in the last year of his life." Candace opened her mouth to interrupt him. Tyler leaned forward. Sienna stopped recording. And for the first time since I walked into that office, I understood that this meeting wasn't unfolding the way Candace thought it would. Miles tapped the tablet once, waking the screen. He hasn't played anything yet. He just let it glow between us, another object Candace hadn't planned for. Then he slid a second folder onto the table, thicker than the first. He said my father had asked him to hold it until this exact moment. Dana leaned in again, calm as ever. She explained that the household accounts Candace managed represented a small slice of my father's finances. 2%, maybe 3%, enough to feel rich, not enough to own anything. The larger assets had been moved, quietly, methodically, 14 months earlier, into something called the Bennett Family Trust. Candace shook her head, hard. She said that wasn't possible. She said she reviewed finances every month. She signed papers. She knew what was where. Miles didn't argue. He just said, "You knew what he chose to show you." Tyler stood up then. He said this was ridiculous. He said my dad would never cut them out, that Candace had taken care of him, that I barely showed up. The words landed the way they were meant to, like blame, like permission. I opened my mouth, then I closed it. Miles answered instead. He said care and control weren't the same thing. He said my father had been very clear about that distinction. That was when Dana placed another sheet in front of Candace. Pharmacy records, dates, dosages, a discrepancy between what had been prescribed and what had been dispensed. She didn't accuse me. She didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. Candace said my dad had been confused, that medication had been necessary, that she'd only done what doctors suggested. Miles asked which doctor. He named one, a cardiologist. He asked why there were claims for neurological medications not tied to that care. Candace didn't answer. Miles finally turned on the tablet. Just a few seconds of video. The front door of my father's house. A man in a suit. A briefcase. Candace letting him in, glancing over her shoulder before closing the door. Mrs. Callahan's voice echoed in my head. Late. Angry. Not like him. Sienna whispered my mum's name. Candace snapped at her to be quiet. Miles stopped the video. He said there was more. Audio, records, timelines. He didn't play them. He didn't have to. He said my father had been lucid enough to hire a private investigator, lucid enough to document everything, lucid enough to know exactly who was trying to rewrite his reality. I felt something inside me settle. Not relief, clarity. All those moments I thought my dad had chosen them over me. All those dinners where he'd gone silent. All those looks I'd misread as indifference. They rearranged themselves into something else. Miles reached for the will at last. He didn't open it yet. He just held it there and said, "Before we read this, you should understand that a will only distributes what's left." Candace stared at him. Her voice came out thin. "What's left of what?" Miles met her eyes. "Of what he owned." He opened the trust documents instead. He explained how ownership worked, how deeds and shares and accounts had been transferred, how the house I grew up in wasn't part of the estate anymore, how the company wasn't either, how the trust named a single beneficiary, me. Candace looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not as a problem, as a threat. Tyler swore under his breath. Sienna started to cry, quiet and confused. Miles closed the folder and said we could proceed with the will now, if everyone still wanted to. The room felt smaller, heavier, and I realized Candace hadn't just underestimated me, she'd misunderstood my father. Miles waited a beat before opening the will. Not for drama, for gravity, the kind that settles when people realize there's no way to talk themselves out of what's coming. He read slowly, formal language, names spoken like coordinates. I heard my father's name and felt the room tilt, just slightly. Candace leaned forward, already nodding, already preparing to receive. Tyler crossed his arms. Sienna wiped her eyes and checked her phone like muscle memory. "To my wife, Candace Bennett," Miles read, "I leave the sum of $1. Candace laughed, a sharp, startled sound. She said there must be a mistake. Miles didn't look up. "To Tyler Reed," he continued, "I leave the sum of $1. Tyler stood halfway out of his chair. "What the hell is this?" he said. His voice cracked on the last word. "To Sienna Reed," Miles said, "I leave the sum of $1. The silence afterward was absolute. No phones, no shifting, just the low hum of the air conditioning and the sound of my own breathing, slow and even, like my body had decided this moment required control. Miles closed the will and placed it neatly on the table. Then he slid a second document forward. An eviction notice. 30 days. The address was the house I grew up in. My house. Candace stared at it like it was written in another language. "This isn't possible," she said. "That house is mine." Miles shook his head once. "The deed was transferred into the trust 14 months ago. The homeowner's insurance, the property taxes, the maintenance account, all paid through the trust." He looked at me. "Which names you as trustee and beneficiary?" Tyler turned on me then, his face red, eyes wild. He said I'd planned this, that I'd manipulated my dad, that I'd waited until he was weak. The words bounced off me. They didn't stick. I'd already seen the proof. I knew the timeline. I knew who had been quiet and who had been careful. Sienna started crying for real this time. Not dramatic, just broken. She asked where they were supposed to go. Candace told her to stop, to get a grip, to let her think. Miles didn't interrupt. He let Candace feel the ground shift beneath her feet. Then he spoke again, softer now. "There's more," he said. "But before we continue, I need to ask you something, Candace. Did you ever crush medication into Graham's food?" Candace's head snapped up. "Of course not." Miles nodded to Dana. She slid the pharmacy logs forward. Dates, quantities, a mismatch that didn't require interpretation. Then Miles reached for the tablet. He played the audio. "Crush it," Candace's voice said, tinny but unmistakable. "He won't notice." I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I felt something cold and steady settle in my chest. Not anger. Recognition. Miles turned off the tablet. "Your husband was not confused," he said. "He was being made to appear that way." Candace stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. She said this was entrapment, lies, that my father had been paranoid, that I'd turned him against his family. "Our family," she said, looking at me like she was trying to pull me back into the story she'd written. I spoke then, just once. "You didn't just try to take his money," I said. "You tried to take his mind." No one interrupted me. Miles handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in my father's handwriting. He told me to open it when I was ready. He told me my father trusted me to decide what happened next. I didn't open it, not yet. I stood up, gathered my coat, and looked at the people who had spent 6 years trying to erase me. They didn't look powerful anymore. They looked exposed. As I walked toward the door, I realized something simple and irreversible. They thought the will was the end. It wasn't. I stepped outside before opening the envelope. The street sounded normal. Cars passing, someone laughing on the corner. Life moved on without any regard for what had just happened inside that building. The air felt colder than it should have, or maybe I was just noticing it for the first time. I opened my father's letter while leaning against the brick wall. His handwriting was careful, slower than it used to be. He apologized for the distance, not in a dramatic way, just a few lines admitting he'd played a role he hated, so I wouldn't be hurt in a way I couldn't recover from. He wrote that he'd watched quietly, that he'd waited, that he trusted me to know the difference between peace and permission. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. When I returned to the conference room, everyone looked at me like they were waiting for a verdict. Candace's confidence was gone. Tyler wouldn't meet my eyes. Sienna stared at the table, mascara smudged, hands shaking. Miles waited without pushing. He already knew what my father had planned. This part was mine. I told him to forward everything to the authorities, the financial records, the pharmacy logs, the investigator's report. I asked him to proceed with the eviction notices and remove Candace from any remaining management roles. I asked for a full audit going back 2 years. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself. Candace tried to speak. I didn't look at her. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't emotional. It was procedural. It was boundaries enforced in ink and signatures. As we wrapped up, Miles mentioned one last clause my father had included, a provision that activated if I chose transparency over silence, a structure meant to protect others before they ever had to sit in a room like that. I nodded. I understood. They thought they'd cut me out for good. All they really did was give me permission to stop protecting them. And once I stopped, everything else became very clear. The days after that meeting didn't feel victorious. They felt quiet, heavy on my shoulders. I spent the first morning alone at my kitchen table, staring at a mug of coffee I didn't drink, listening to the refrigerator hum like it always had. My body felt wrung out, like something had finally let go, and now there was nothing holding me upright but habit. A week later, I went back to the house. The front door opened the same way it always had, but the rooms sounded different, quieter. No music playing from upstairs, no voices on speakerphone, just the low HVAC hum and the soft creak of floorboards settling. The house smelled like dust and old wood, not perfume. I stood in the entryway longer than I needed to, unsure where to put my bag, like a guest who'd arrived early. I walked into the garage last. That was where my dad used to disappear when he needed to think. It still smelled faintly of oil and cardboard. On his workbench, beneath a stack of manuals, I found a slim folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with my name written across the top. Under it, a note in his handwriting. If anyone ever questions the truth, start here. I sat down on the concrete floor and held it in my lap. He'd protected the memory, the proof, but he hadn't protected me when it mattered. That realization hurt in a quiet way I couldn't fix. Mrs. Callahan stopped by that afternoon with a casserole she didn't ask me if I wanted. She apologized without quite saying sorry. She told me she'd known something was wrong and hadn't known how to help. I told her I wasn't angry. I meant it. Anger takes energy. I didn't have any left to give away. Healing didn't look dramatic. It looked like changing the locks, cancelling automatic payments, clearing one drawer in the kitchen and leaving the rest for later. I kept the garage exactly the same. Some things didn't need to be touched yet. There was a moment, standing in the living room, when the thought hit me hard and clean. I would trade the house, the money, all of it, for one moment where my father chose me while he was alive. I stood with that truth until it settled. Then I let it go. I don't get to rewrite his choices. I only get to decide what I accept now. That night, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice. Careful, tired. She said her father was 73, that his new wife wouldn't let anyone see him. She asked if I knew where to start. I saved the message. I haven't called back yet, but I was listening. If you've ever been the one who stayed quiet to keep the family together, this story probably hit close to home. Hit subscribe if you know what it feels like to be pushed aside by family decisions. Like this video, share it with someone who lived through something similar, and tell me in the comments what you would have done. I read every message. Your story might be the next one I tell.